AITA for getting my sister-in-law pregnant after my wife opened our marriage. My name is Kevin, and I am 32 years old. By profession, I am a civil engineer, and I have always considered myself a calm guy, someone who values stability and loyalty in a relationship. I have never been the kind of man who plays games or gets involved in unnecessary drama. When I married Amanda 5 years ago, I was sure that we were on the same page about what we wanted for the future. She, at 29 years old, was determined, charismatic, and always knew how to win anyone over with her contagious energy. Our marriage was never perfect, but I truly believed we had a solid foundation based on respect and trust. But that night, sitting in an upscale restaurant downtown, I would discover that Amanda did not view our relationship the same way. She had insisted that we have a special dinner, and I thought it was just another attempt to rekindle the spark in our marriage, something that with our busy schedules we often neglected. When we arrived, she seemed restless, moving the silverware and looking at the menu without paying much attention. Something was different. That was when, in the middle of the meal, she dropped the bomb. Amanda looked at me and said, "Kevin, I want an open marriage." I froze for a moment. I thought I had heard her wrong. My heart raced, and the fork I was holding felt heavy in my hand. What did she mean by that? Was there someone else? I have never been an insecure man, but those words hit me directly. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm to answer her. I asked her, "What do you mean, Amanda? Do you mean that we could both see other people?" The question came out shaky, as if I were giving her the chance to back down, to say it was just a joke or an absurd, unfounded idea. But Amanda did not back down. On the contrary, she smiled as if she were teaching me something revolutionary and answered, "Yes, Kevin, but do not see it as a betrayal, but as an evolution. Many modern couples do this. It would be good for us." Her enthusiasm made me feel sick. How could she speak about it so naturally? The woman I married, who said she loved me, was sitting there offering to share our marriage with other people as if this were normal. My mind started making quick connections. I wondered if she was already seeing someone, and this was just a way to justify it. The love I felt for her was no longer reciprocated. I tried to process everything without exploding. Then I told her, "So basically you want to date other men and still come home to me as if nothing happened?" My voice came out harsher than I expected, but I wanted to understand the extent of her hypocrisy. Amanda rolled her eyes, as if I were being childish, and told me, "Kevin, you are being closed-minded and old-fashioned. This could be an incredible experience for both of us, something that would strengthen us." That made me laugh, but not in a good way. I felt mocked. How could it strengthen anything? Sharing my wife with other men. I looked around the restaurant. People were talking, laughing, and toasting. For them, this was just another normal night. But for me, that was the beginning of the end. My appetite disappeared, and Amanda's words echoed in my head like a nightmare I could not wake up from. I tried to find a trace of the woman I loved, of the person who promised we would be together regardless of the difficulties. But looking at her, I only saw someone who wanted something more than a marriage. She wanted a free pass to live as she pleased while I stood there as if nothing had changed. Without saying anything, I grabbed my wallet, threw some cash on the table, and stood up. Amanda looked at me, confused, and asked, "Kevin, what is wrong with you? Why are you reacting like this?" But I had nothing more to say. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. That night, I drove for hours trying to understand at what point I had lost my wife to this distorted idea of freedom. I drove aimlessly for hours trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in my head. The car cruised down the highway, but my mind was still trapped at that dining table, in that absurd request Amanda made to me as if it were the most normal thing in the world. How could she think this was acceptable? How could you believe I would simply accept sharing my wife with other men? I tried to find some logic in what she said. I tried for a second to see it from her perspective, but the truth was clear. She wanted the freedom of a single woman while keeping the comforts of marriage. The dark night seemed to reflect the emptiness forming inside me. My marriage was already over. When things started to change, perhaps I was too naive to believe we were fine, that we were still a solid couple. Now, seeing things clearly, I cleared my throat and realized the signs were always there. The distance, the constant outings, the empty excuses, and worst of all, Amanda's conviction, as if that were an irrefutable proposal, and as if I were the problem for not accepting. But since when did I become the wrong one for wanting a monogamous relationship? My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, while the knot in my chest only grew. I was never controlling. I never stopped Amanda from doing anything. I never treated her with distrust. But now, after this conversation, I realized she had made her decision a long time ago, and I was the last to know. The car glided down the road as I tried to hold back the urge to go home and scream, to demand explanations from her, to make her understand the absurdity of what she was asking, but deep down I knew. She did not care how I felt. I pulled into a gas station and took a deep breath, trying to pull myself together. The clock showed it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, but I did not want to go home. How could I face her after that? How could I sleep next to someone who in that moment seemed like a complete stranger to me? I picked up my phone and saw some messages from her asking where I was and if I was going to be late. The coldness of the words angered me even more. No apology, no attempt to calm the situation. No remorse at all. She really thought I would accept this without hesitation. I swallowed hard and decided I needed time to process everything. I got back in the car and kept driving aimlessly, trying to make sense of the disaster my life was now in. I remembered the woman I met, the Amanda who made future plans with me, who talked about children, trips, and shared dreams. Where did this woman end up? Because the person who looked me in the eyes and suggested an open marriage without a hint of hesitation was definitely not the same person I married. And it was there, on that deserted highway, that I began to understand. Maybe that Amanda never really existed. The gas was running low, and the exhaustion was starting to weigh on my eyes. I could not run away forever, as much as I wanted to. Eventually, I would have to go back and face reality. But one thing was certain. There was no way to continue with that marriage as if nothing had happened. What Amanda did was more than an absurd request. It was proof that our relationship was already destroyed. When I finally returned home, the silence was deafening. The living room was lit only by the dim light of the lamp, and Amanda was sitting on the couch waiting for me. She did not look nervous or sorry. In fact, her body language expressed impatience, as if I were a moody child who had left the house for no reason. Amanda looked at me and said in an irritated tone, "Kevin, what was all this drama? You were out all night." Her voice sounded annoyed, as if the problem was my reaction and not what she had asked of me at the restaurant. I closed my eyes for a second and took a deep breath before answering her. I looked at her and said, "Amanda, did you really think I would take this calmly? That I would just smile and say, 'Sure, love, go date whoever you want'?" My patience was at its limit. Amanda crossed her arms and sighed as if she were tired of having to explain the obvious to me. She answered, "Kevin, this is normal. Many couples do this. It is just you who is backward. It does not mean I do not love you. It means I want to explore other possibilities without giving up what we have." My hands trembled with anger at her response. How can someone love a person and at the same time desire that kind of freedom? Everything about her, from her posture to her tone of voice, screamed selfishness. The truth was clear. She wanted to have fun without consequences, but I would not be her backup plan. I sat in the armchair and stared at her for a few seconds before dropping the final sentence. "If you want this, go live alone." The words came out with a coldness that even I did not expect. Amanda's eyes widened in surprise at the firmness of my response. She said, "What, Kevin? Do not be radical. We can talk more about this. Maybe set rules, guidelines." Now she wanted to create a manual on how I should accept being disrespected. I laughed humorlessly and shook my head to answer her. "There is no talking, Amanda. If you want to live like this, fine, but without me." For the first time that night, I saw a flash of hesitation in her eyes, but it was not regret. It was fear of losing the financial and emotional stability I provided at home. She tried to argue, tried to convince me that I was overreacting, that it was just a phase, an experience that could strengthen us. But for me, it was already decided. The marriage I knew was over. I got up and went to the bedroom, starting to gather some things. I did not know if I would sleep there that night or leave again, but I needed to make it clear that there was no room for negotiations. Amanda continued talking from the other room, but her words became background noise. I no longer listened because deep down I already knew the truth. She never valued what we had. When I looked back, I saw that she had finally stopped talking. She was sitting on the couch looking at the floor and biting her lower lip. Perhaps for the first time that night, she realized I was no longer the same man who accepted everything in silence. She looked at me and asked in a whisper, "So, is that it?" I shook my head and answered, "Yes, Amanda, that is it." I grabbed my jacket, looked one more time at the woman I once loved, and walked out of the room. If she wanted freedom, I would give it to her, but without me in the equation. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and practical decisions. Amanda did not argue much when I told her I was moving out of the house permanently. Maybe she thought it was just an overreaction and that after a while I would return. But I knew there was no going back. She wanted freedom, so I decided to let her enjoy it alone. I packed all my belongings and started looking for an apartment to start over. Meanwhile, Amanda decided to move in with her sister Jessica. Jessica was always more reserved and very different from her. Unlike Amanda, Jessica was never impulsive or reckless. She always seemed to me a balanced and discreet person. And although we were not very close in the past, I respected her. Amanda seemed excited about the new stage of her life. I found out through mutual friends that she was already seeing other people and enjoying the freedom she desired so much. At first it hurt. Sure, I was still processing everything, trying to understand how someone who swore eternal love could simply throw away a marriage of years as if it were something disposable. But over time I realized it was not about me. Amanda never wanted a real marriage, only the security of having someone there while she did whatever she wanted. And honestly, I no longer had the energy to care about her. While she enjoyed this new life, I focused on rebuilding mine. I started going out with my friends again, dedicated myself more to work, and most importantly, began to reflect on what I really wanted for my future. It was during this process that I ended up having more contact with Jessica. At first, it was just occasional conversations. We exchanged messages about paperwork and practical things regarding the division of our assets in the divorce proceedings. But little by little, Jessica began to show a genuine interest in how I was coping with everything. Unlike her sister, Jessica seemed to care deeply about my emotional state. She never justified Amanda's actions, nor tried to downplay the situation. On the contrary, when we spoke, she made it clear that she also found it all absurd. One day, while we were having coffee at a local cafe, Jessica told me directly, "I love my sister, but honestly, I do not understand what is going through her head." For the first time in a long time, I felt someone truly understood me, and that made all the difference. Over time, our conversations became more frequent. I did not expect Jessica to be someone I would open up to, but there she was, listening without judging and offering support with no hidden agenda. The strangest thing was that for the first time since the breakup, I did not feel completely alone. I did not know this unexpected closeness would completely change the course of my life. Getting involved with Jessica was something that happened naturally, almost without me noticing. At first, it was just a sporadic exchange of text messages. Then they became quick calls until, before I knew it, we were meeting frequently to talk about our lives. It was not planned, but being near her brought me a kind of peace I had not felt in a long time. Jessica was different from Amanda in every way, more discreet, more empathetic, and more genuine. While my ex-wife went through her freedom phase pursuing new relationships with other men, Jessica was the only person who truly seemed to care about what I was going through. She never forced any situation or tried to justify her sister's actions. On the contrary, she was always direct and sincere in her opinions. One day, while we were talking, Jessica looked at me and said, "Kevin, I am sorry for what happened. If you want to know, I also think Amanda crossed the line. You did not deserve this." These words took me by surprise. For so long, I had only heard justifications from Amanda and absurd explanations about modernity and free relationships. Hearing someone say I was right in my monogamous stance was like a physical relief. Jessica did not try to twist the facts. She saw things as they really were. I was emotionally betrayed even before any further steps occurred. Our contact began to deepen in unexpected ways. One day, she invited me to go for a bike ride on the trails in the park, a physical activity I had not done in years. At first, the proposal surprised me. It was not a formal romantic date. It was not an attempt to fill an emotional void. It was just an invitation to go out and get some fresh air. And without realizing it, it was exactly what my body and mind needed. We spent hours talking about everything: family, work, dreams, and accumulated frustrations. With Jessica, there were no masks or psychological games, just two people sharing thoughts and trying to understand how life had led us to that breaking point. It was in this simplicity that I began to notice something different about her. The way she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved, and the way she always found the right words to comfort me without making me feel like a failure. It was impossible not to notice the difference. Jessica not only understood me, she truly saw me as a person. And that was something Amanda never did during the 5 years of our marriage. It was as if for years I had been in a relationship where my physical presence was convenient to maintain a status, but never essential for affection. With Jessica, every conversation, every look, and every small gesture seemed to have a real meaning. At first I struggled with these internal feelings. I thought it was wrong or inappropriate because she was my ex-wife's sister. But then I processed the situation and thought, why should I feel guilty for something that was born so genuinely? I never cheated on Amanda. I never played dirty, nor did I break my marriage vows. If now, after all the chaos, I was discovering what a real relationship was, then maybe this was simply destiny correcting a mistake from my past. And that day, when saying goodbye after another ride in the park, I realized there were no longer any doubts in my mind. Jessica was not just a support in the midst of the chaos. She was becoming something much more important to me. Things were beginning to return to normal in my routine. My formal divorce with Amanda was not fully finalized in court yet, but emotionally, I had already moved on with my life. Jessica and I became inseparable, and what used to be just a supportive friendship turned into something bigger and real. For the first time in a long time, I felt I was in a relationship based on respect, admiration, and mutual complicity. I was happy, but as always happened, Amanda had the gift of appearing in my life just when I least expected it. She sent me a text message out of nowhere. First it was a simple, "Hi, how are you?" Then she sent another more insistent message that said, "Can we talk?" I knew that was not a good sign due to her impulsive track record. When I finally decided to answer and agree to the meeting, she was already outside my apartment building waiting for my arrival. I opened the apartment door, and as soon as I saw her face, I knew something was wrong in her single life. She was no longer the radiant, energetic, and self-assured woman asking me for an open marriage in the upscale restaurant. Amanda seemed lost, dejected, and almost remorseful of her past actions. "I made a mistake. I made a mistake, Kevin." Those were the first words out of her mouth as soon as she entered the living room. I let out an ironic laugh at her statement. Now she realized it. Now, after throwing our 5-year marriage in the trash for a whim of freedom, she wanted to come back home. Amanda tried to justify herself by saying it had only been a phase of her life, that she thought she needed to explore her freedom, but she realized that none of this made sense without me by her side. She told me verbatim, "I miss you. I know I made a mistake, but we can try again." Her cynicism was almost comical to me. I crossed my arms and stared at her for a moment before answering her. "Amanda, you told me you wanted freedom, so why are you here now?" My voice was firm and showed no trace of the pain I once felt for her on the road. She swallowed hard and looked away across the room to tell me, "Because I realized I already had everything I needed. I lost my way, Kevin, but I want to make things right." But it was already too late for her apologies. For a second I thought about how typical this behavior was of her. She thought she could do whatever she wanted, explore all her options with other men, and then go home as if nothing had happened to resume financial stability. But I was no longer the same man who walked out of that restaurant that night. I had changed. And ironically, in that moment I realized Amanda was still the same selfish person, incapable of facing the consequences of her own decisions. I looked directly into her eyes, and with the utmost calm in the world I said, "Amanda, you only want to come back because you realize the outside world is not what you imagined. But I have already moved on." She blinked a couple of times, seeming to process those words of rejection, and finally asked, "Moved on with who?" I smiled hearing her. She was not prepared for the answer she was about to receive. Amanda stood still in the center of the living room, as if her brain had stopped processing auditory impulses. The words that had just come out of my mouth left her paralyzed. I told her directly, "Jessica is pregnant with my child." For a moment, I thought she was going to pass out on the floor. Her skin turned pale instantly. Her eyes widened enormously, and her mouth opened and closed a couple of times without her emitting any articulate sound. I had never seen Amanda in that state of loss of control. She was out of arguments and without a plan B to manipulate the situation in her favor. She was always the woman who assumed she could do whatever she wanted and that in the end people's structures would revolve around her desires. But now, for the first time in her adult life, she was completely outside the power dynamic. Then came the outburst. She raised her voice at me. "Are you kidding, right? My sister, my own sister?" Her voice was shrill and full of despair. She jumped up and started pacing back and forth across the room, running her hands over her face and hair erratically, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. I simply crossed my arms and watched her from my position in the armchair. It was an obvious contradiction when I was supposed to accept her seeing other men in the name of evolution and modernity. Everything was fine according to her parameters. But now that biological life had found a way to balance the burdens of the consequences, she could not tolerate the outcome. Amanda kept talking to herself, wondering aloud, "How did this happen? How could you two do this to me?" She was trying to process at what point she had lost control over me and her sister. The victim tone she was adopting amused me, so I let out a short, sarcastic laugh. I answered her directly. "Amanda, I thought you believed in freedom, in exploring new experiences. Is that not what you wanted for both of us at the restaurant? Because I explored and found something much better than what I had with you in 5 years." My words had the physical impact of a slap to her face. She froze completely, looking at me with an expression of pure hostility in her eyes. But given that it was the exact description of reality, I decided to execute the final action of the conversation. I walked toward the exit door of the apartment, threw it wide open, and stared at her to say, "Oh, and do you know what the funniest part of all this is?" She issued no verbal response, just maintained her steady gaze laden with frustration. I completed the thought by telling her, "Now you are no longer my wife. You are just the aunt of my son." That was the exact moment the reality of the family structure settled in her mind. The woman who thought she could discard me as a partner and get me back when her options failed was now relegated to watching from the periphery as I built a family unit with her own sister. Amanda said nothing more because she lacked the elements to refute the situation. She gripped her purse tightly, walked past me without making physical contact, and went out the apartment door, slamming it shut as she closed it. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the silence generated after the impact of the wood. I locked the door with the certainty that this was the last time Amanda would try to interfere directly in my private space. She had made her decisions in the restaurant, and I had made mine accordingly. After the door closed and Amanda disappeared from the hallway, I experienced a sense of relief in my shoulders, as if a heavy physical burden had been removed, but I knew the situation would not end there. Amanda was not an individual who accepted losing her position of control easily. And now that she had the biological role of being the aunt to my future child, it was foreseeable that she would try to find ways to alter the stability of my relationship with Jessica. The determining factor was that I was no longer willing to validate her behaviors. During the days following the altercation in the apartment, Amanda's behavior shifted to the realm of digital communication. I received a few brief, direct text messages from her saying, "We can talk. This cannot be happening. Kevin, you need to talk to me." I did not issue any interactive response to her requests. Later, Amanda began sending longer, melodramatic text messages, expressing her disbelief at my involvement with her own sister and labeling the situation as an unforgivable act. The hypocrisy of her stance was evident. To her, it was forgivable to demand I accept an open marriage for her benefit, but she considered it an offense that I had rebuilt my life under a monogamous structure with Jessica. The impact of the news on our old circle of mutual friends was immediate. Some people took a supportive stance toward Amanda, arguing that it was not ethically correct for me to get involved with her direct sister. However, other members of the group understood the irony of the situation and the fact that everything stemmed from Amanda's initial proposal at the restaurant. She took it upon herself to spread a narrative where she presented herself as the party betrayed by her ex-husband and by her own sister in an attempt to capture the pity of others. Her relationship with Jessica collapsed completely due to her actions. Amanda tried to contact her sister on multiple occasions to exert psychological manipulation over her. In one of the voice messages Jessica showed me to bring me up to speed, Amanda could be heard raising her voice in a high-pitched tone. "You destroyed our family." Amanda attributed to Jessica the responsibility for the fracture of the family unit, omitting her own prior conduct. Jessica, maintaining her characteristic behavior of maturity and emotional serenity, did not fall for her sister's provocations or verbal aggressions. She simply issued a brief and forceful text response to end the interaction. She wrote directly, "The family was destroyed the day you decided Kevin should accept being your plan B." That technical statement marked the end point of communication between the two. Amanda no longer possessed any mechanism of power or influence over me nor over Jessica. This lack of control over her environment generated severe internal frustration. Later, through information provided by mutual acquaintances who still maintained contact with her, I learned that Amanda tried to maintain a stance of denial of reality. She tried to convince people around her that my relationship with Jessica was just a passing phase motivated by spite, that it would not last over time, and that I was simply in a state of mental confusion. Amanda truly operated under the belief that I would wake up one day with the desire to resume the bond with her. But as the months passed and Jessica's pregnancy progressed regularly, strengthening our union, Amanda began to process the irreversibility of the facts. Not only had I left her behind permanently, but I was experiencing a real state of well-being that she was never able to provide me. Amanda's last resort consisted of trying to push the idea that I had stayed with Jessica solely as a structured act of revenge to cause her psychological damage. She kept repeating to people around her that it was an act of cruelty on my part to have destroyed her stability. However, by that point in the social dynamic, the members of our circle no longer granted validity to her statements. Her constant prior arrogance and the nature of her demands at the restaurant had broken the bonds of trust with most people. She was left alone, without a support group to validate her systematic laments. At the core of her behavior, what really generated that burden of anger and indignation was not the supposed betrayal, but the biological certainty that she had thrown away a stable marriage that she could never recover. Amanda began to live under that shadow of frustration. The ex-wife who tried to force me into an open marriage designed for her personal enjoyment was now relegated to the position of being the aunt of my future son, forced to watch my family's success from the sidelines without the ability to alter the outcome. Amanda tried to resist the reality of the facts and find a way to trap me again in her cycle of interactions. But at that point in my life, there was no turning back. I moved forward with the project of forming a family unit with Jessica. With every new failed contact attempt on her part, Amanda's text messages became more desperate. In one of them she wrote, "Kevin, let us talk one more time, please. Are you really going to erase me from your life like this? I know I made a mistake, but there is no need to be so cruel." I considered that the cruelty did not come from my end, but from hers when she demanded at the restaurant that I accept an open marriage designed for her personal enjoyment and expected me to remain in a backup position awaiting her voluntary return. In a last-ditch effort to regain some measure of control over the situation, Amanda showed up at my apartment door unannounced. It was her last in-person move. Upon opening the door, I immediately realized she was no longer the same woman who once looked at me with a posture of superiority and arrogance, convinced she would always be in control of people's structures. Her gaze, once full of self-confidence, now projected an expression of insecurity, fragility, and defeat. Amanda told me directly, "Kevin, I know I cannot change what happened, but we can at least stay in touch. We have known each other for years, and it makes no sense to simply erase everything." I let out a short laugh at her proposal. I understood her goal was to keep me close as a backup option for her personal security, a reminder of what her stability could have been. But that chapter of my life was definitively closed. I crossed my arms and faced her, showing no hesitation at all, to say, "Amanda, you already made your decision at the restaurant. Now you must deal with its consequences." She widened her eyes enormously, showing surprise at the coldness of my response. Perhaps she operated under the expectation of finding some weakness in my stance, but I experienced no affection toward her. Amanda insisted on the conversation, trying to project her fears onto my new relationship. She asked me directly, "What if Jessica does to you what I did? Are you not afraid this is all temporary?" In that instant, I understood the true motive of her physical visit. She was not looking to apologize or close the cycle maturely, but to sow doubts in my mind to make me question my current state of well-being. Her strategy did not work. I smiled and gave her a direct answer that nullified her arguments. The difference between you two, Amanda, is that Jessica knows what partnership commitment means, and that is why I am having a baby with her and not with you. That was the exact moment I observed the definitive change in her facial expression. The remnant of arrogance she still retained faded completely. Amanda opened her mouth to formulate a response, but did not emit any articulate sound. She possessed no more arguments, excuses, or justifications of a modern nature to support her position. She knew she had lost the game definitively. All the fury and indignation she manifested dissolved on the spot upon understanding she could not manipulate or convince me to resume the bond. The power game had ended, and her penalty was to live knowing she had lost the husband she thought she controlled and her own sister, who would now form a biological family unit. She lowered her head, uttered an inaudible murmur, and left the place without creating a scene or annoying noises. She simply disappeared from my sight down the hallway, and I proceeded to close the door without looking back. With Amanda permanently out of my living space, I proceeded to focus on what truly held importance to me, my new family. What started as supportive contact and information exchange with Jessica transformed into a real and functional relationship. I discovered what a couple's bond based on the absence of manipulations, without selfishness, and without psychological power games was like. Simply genuine affection, mutual respect, and complicity in common projects. The months following the resolution of the conflict consisted of a sequence of activities oriented toward the birth of our child, the periodic appointments with the obstetrician, planning future expenses, and choosing names for the baby. Jessica brought out a version of myself that I considered nullified after Amanda's behaviors, the version that believes in a real partnership. With Jessica, I did not experience the need to measure my words or constantly prove my personal worth. Our relationship developed naturally, without the need to create crisis situations to capture the other's attention. I was not an emotional accessory for someone seeking outside entertainment. I was a priority in her daily life. The most ironic part of the situation was that what Amanda labeled a passing phase motivated by spite transformed into a permanent structure. Amanda no longer possesses any mechanism of power over me, but her biological connection with my future son will be permanent due to her role as an aunt. She, who operated under the belief she could win me back when her outside options failed, will have to watch our family develop from the periphery with no ability to alter the outcome. The stories she tried to spread about me in our social circles lack validity, and nobody gives credit to her victim narrative anymore. I am no longer interested in what she thinks or feels. Her opinion carries no weight in my daily decisions. My focus remains exclusively on what I am building with Jessica, a real home derived from a reconfiguration of the pieces of my life after that night at the restaurant. Comment: I've been thinking a lot about this story lately, and it really hit me how important it is to value your self-respect in any relationship. You deserve someone who respects the boundaries you set, and it's okay to walk away when those lines are crossed. What stands out to me is how kindness and genuine care can help us heal after tough times. Taking responsibility for our own happiness is something we all need to remember. I've learned that choosing peace over drama makes such a difference in our lives. If you're going through something similar, I hope you take a moment to reflect on what truly matters to you. Building a relationship based on mutual respect and honesty feels so much more fulfilling in the long run. It reminds me that real healing starts when we surround ourselves with people who lift us up. So, today, I just want to encourage you to prioritize your well-being and make choices that bring you true calm. Let's all keep working on creating the kind of life and connections that leave us feeling truly at peace. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.